What's up everyone? Brian Peterson here again, and today we're at Full Sail University's Blackmore Studios. Rooster Teeth gave a group of students and grads at Full Sail University the opportunity to join RTX, the Rooster Teeth Gaming Convention, and showcase their own game. The Full Sail team decided to build something from the ground up and deliver with an awesome 80s style tournament fighter, complete with its own custom-built retro arcade cabinet. They call it Fury Strike, and we're going to find out how they made it from design, graphics, motion capture, and music, all the way to constructing the cabinet itself. Let's take a look. These are our industry professionals and Full Sail instructors, Jason and Patrick. Guys, we have our own game that we're building now. Talk us a little bit about the design with the game that we have.
With a game like this, Fury Strike, the 80s beatdown, we started with a high concept art piece. So we know the style of what we want to do.
Right, you had the idea of that.
Yeah, we want to do something in the vein of a 1980s action television show with a lot of high neon. So given that, they were like, how can we create a game based on these high concepts? And that's where this came from. It's like a throwback to the old fighters.
We're gonna try to design our own video game. Where do we even start?
Lots of times a game will originate with a feature. If you look at a game like Portal, Portal started with an idea of having a gun that shoots a teleportation. Then what they did was they made that fun and they created a reason to shoot this thing. So you start with a concept which is, I have something that I like to do that's fun. And then you expand that on, now I need a reason to do that. Then you add a story on top. So that'll be a very story-driven one. And that's done episodically. So what you'll do is you'll have a script on what the game is supposed to look like, and then you put in the gameplay around that, so it's really like an interactive movie.
It's a collaboration between everybody, right? So you have the designers, right? But at that time, programmers and artists need to get involved because they need to kind of say, well, we can and cannot do these things. And a lot of planning goes into that as far as how the architecture of the system is. There might already be an engine that exists. Unity and Unreal are very popular engines. Lead our games definitely being made in those.
Awesome, well thank you so much guys. The design's really cool. All right guys, so tell me, what does a designer have to do to move the game along?
Well, the first thing a designer does is he creates a game design document, which they refer to as the GDD. The GDD is then taken to the tech director and the art director, and then the senior producer, and then we go into passes. I've worked on a lot of games where we've tried to incorporate water one way or the other, and that is crazy complicated because of all the different things that go into it.
Yeah, and water is a good example. We can start looking at how would we actually do that, right? Do we want something that looks exactly like real life, which that's difficult, right? Like trying to do fluid dynamics.
Something
like
more cartoonish maybe.
Right, if you can do something simulated, that's easier to do, where you can do some combination of art and programming to get you where you want to go rather than a real fluid dynamic system, then that could cut a lot of time off of that. But it depends, and it's kind of a give and take between how much time it's going to take from a programmer, how much time it's going to take from an artist, et cetera, et cetera.
If I'm going to let Jason work on water for the next 3 months, there better be water everywhere in the game.
Yep.
There better be a fish tank around every corner. People should be squirting each other with squirt guns. There's water everywhere. So when you're working on a game, you have a bunch of distinct phases in a project. Usually it's concepting phase, then a pre-production phase, then a production phase, then a alpha, beta, gold. So if we were going to have water in the game, I would work with the programmers and we would have a room and we could prove that the player can walk around and water can flow and interact, right? That'll happen in its own sandbox. And then you'll have combat, and that'll happen in its own sandbox. And then anything else you have, and each one has its own sandbox. Combat is not affected by
Everything's
water.
completely done separately. It's
And
not like, hey, there's water, now there's combat.
That's when prototype happens. When you take all the POCs and you merge them together into one thing, that's where you call it a prototype, because they're all working in conjunction with one another, and that's usually where everything breaks. Because you put it all together and you're stacking all this unproven tech and unproven feature, one on top of the other,
Yeah.
So you've got
for the first time.
For the first time ever. And then you have conflicting code and conflicting art assets and everything else.
So Patrick, when we're determining the scope of a project, what's some things that we need to keep in mind?
Well, the main things you want to keep in the forefront are the resources, your time, and your quality, which is also complexity of a game. And that's called your scope triangle. So on most games, you'll have a feature, and you have to determine how long that feature takes, and then how much time and how much resources you're going to devote to that product. So an example of that would be if you had something, feature A took this amount of time, and then feature B took this amount of time. Feature A is slated to take 3 months, feature B is slated to take 1 month. So if this goes over budget and actually ends up eating into the time all the way into B, so you have a cut that needs to be made in the game. There's a few things you can do. One, you can leave it as is, and you can completely cut feature B from the game. If that's not an option, another thing you could do is add more time to the game. So I added a month onto the schedule, which will give me that time back. I add 3 people to the game, to the project. That will allow me to then get that amount of man hours. Time is determined in man hours.
Yep.
Or I reduce the complexity of A to the point where I can get B back.
Somehow you're juggling your scope triangle
Yes.
to get your finished project.
Exactly, and where it's going to fall. Now the interesting thing about a student game is that a student does not have control over time, and they do not have control over resources. Those are fixed. All right, after you've determined this, how to get to A and B, you've got a series of features called A features, the B features, then C features.
Right.
And this is where you make all these things. So to determine where these features fall, you have 2 parts of the game. You have what's called the MVP, which is the minimum viable product. What is the most basic version of the game that I could possibly have?
Fundamentals.
Right. So if I have a platformer game and I want to find out what the minimum viable product for the platformer game is, what would be some of the things that need to go into the platformer?
Jumping.
Jumping, right. So
Yeah.
jumping is an A feature. You don't have a platformer without jumping.
Got
you
it,
don't have
okay.
a platformer without things to jump on. So at the very least is platforms and jumping. And then of course running and
Right.
doing that other stuff. In that case, you would say, okay, jumping, platforms, running, all have to be A. That's my minimum viable product. And then you move down to C. A C feature is all the cool stuff. Everything that goes,
Details, colors, everything that,
Yeah.
so like the final product.
C is your wish list.
Correct.
So A is if something goes terribly, terribly wrong, and you still have to ship. C is what we want to have. So C has all the cool stuff, the fire effects you want, the explosions, the bosses, the mini bosses, the variety of different enemies you fight. And then from there, what you do is you take A, and you've got C. Now you find the halfway point between those two, and that's B. So A is what's necessary, B is what you would like to have, and then C is your wish list.
Right.
Everybody sets out to make the C, and then they usually end up somewhere about B.
I didn't have an idea what the scope was, but I totally get it now. Thanks, Patrick. I totally appreciate it. Jason, Patrick, thank you so much for hanging out with me today and teaching me about game design. It's insane how much goes into just having an idea for a video game and trying to get that made. It was really cool. Thanks, guys. And if you guys really enjoyed this video, be sure to like, subscribe, and hit that bell. And if you want to learn more about Full Sail University, be sure to visit fullsail.edu. We'll see you next episode.